Welcome back. How was the United Nations Charter? Have you had a chance to make some interesting discoveries? What did you find in Chapter 4? What does it tell us about the functions and the powers of the United Nations General Assembly? I guess you've come across phrases like this. The General Assembly may discuss any questions or any matters. The General Assembly may make recommendations with regard to. The General Assembly may consider the general principles of. The General Assembly may discuss any questions relating to. The General Assembly may call the attention of the Security Council to situations in which. The General Assembly may initiate studies and make recommendations for the purpose of. The General Assembly may recommend measures for. As you can hear and as you can see, all of this is kept in soft tones. None of this sounds like much decision power. It sounds like a lot of talk and little real action. And that's the way it is. Even though the General Assembly is the main deliberative, policy-making and representative organ of the United Nations, it isn't anything like a world parliament. Are you slightly disappointed? You're allowed to be. But the important thing is to adjust our expectations to the realities of international politics. And what about the Security Council? What expectations shall we have towards the Security Council? Here you have a picture of the Security Council. At first glance, it looks a little bit like a world government. But to what extent is it able to take real government action? The United Nations Charter vests the Security Council with far-reaching authority and competencies. Article 24, paragraph 1 states that in order to ensure prompt and effective action by the United Nations, its members confer on the Security Council primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, and agree that in carrying out its duties under this responsibility, the Security Council acts on their behalf. And Article 25 adds that the members of the United Nations agree to accept and carry out the decisions of the Security Council in accordance with the present Charter. Here you have what the emphasis is on. It's all about ensuring prompt and effective action through the Security Council. And Article 25 makes it clear that all members of the United Nations have to accept and carry out the decisions of the Security Council. In fact, the Security Council is the only organ of the United Nations that can issue decisions that are binding for the member states. But what about decision-making in the Security Council? How does it work? Article 27 states that 1. Each member of the Security Council shall have 1 vote. 2. Decisions of the Security Council on procedural matters shall be made by an affirmative vote of 9 members. 3. And most importantly, decisions of the Security Council on all other matters, that is to say, on all substantive matters, shall be made by an affirmative vote of 9 members, including the concurring votes of the permanent members. So what does that mean? What do we have to understand by the phrase of concurring votes? In political practice, this term has been considered to include abstentions. So as soon as a permanent member of the Security Council decides to not to vote on a specific matter, it is considered to have given its concurring vote. As a result, Article 27, paragraph 3 of the United Nations Charter is interpreted in political practice in the sense of a veto power. This is the famous veto power that permanent members of the Security Council have. And this brings us to the current situation in the United Nations Security Council. You have it on this chart. Of the 15 members of the Security Council, 5 are permanent members that have a veto right. The other 10 are non-permanent members elected for 2-year terms with no veto right. And there is some geographical pattern that is respected in political practice. The permanent members make use of their veto power, and you have some interesting statistics on the chart. Majority decisions taken in the Security Council are frequently vetoed, which means that decision-making in the Security Council is regularly blocked. This proves to be a major handicap. It's a massive obstacle. As you can imagine, vetoes in most cases prevent the Security Council from taking effective action. It's not any kind of effective world government we have with the Security Council. And here again, we have to adjust our expectations to the realities of international politics. Much of the daily business of the United Nations is done by another organ, the Secretariat. The Secretariat is a rather big organ headquartered in New York. It is headed by the Secretary General, who is the Chief Administrative Officer of the United Nations. It employs over 40,000 international civil servants. And apart from headquarters in New York, it runs multiple offices and departments in New York and throughout the world. And all of this serves to carry out the day-to-day work of the United Nations. And this includes, among other things, United Nations peacekeeping missions. Currently, there are 13 United Nations peacekeeping operations that are deployed on 3 continents with over 110 peacekeepers involved. But where do all these people come from? Which countries contribute most in terms of peacekeeping personnel? You might think that European countries and the United States of America are making major contributions. However, while this was true in the early decades of the United Nations, it's no longer the case today. Today, the contribution of the countries of the European Union is below 5% and the American contribution below 1%. The major contributors are in Asia and in Africa, including countries such as India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Ethiopia, and Nigeria. Let me move on to the remaining organs. The main judicial organ of the United Nations is the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. The ICJ is the only main organ of the United Nations that is not based in New York, but in The Hague. The last main organ I would like to mention shortly is the Economic and Social Council. You have it here on the picture. The Economic and Social Council is the central forum for the discussion of economic and social issues, and it is also responsible for coordinating the work of specialized agencies that are attached to the Economic and Social Council. Those specialized agencies include the Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome, the International Labour Organization based in Geneva, the International Civil Aviation Organization in Montreal, the International Maritime Organization in London, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. Furthermore, we have the World Health Organization, WHO, based in Geneva, which is the organization that is currently quite literally going viral. Then we have the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, based in Washington, D.C., the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna, the World Intellectual Property Organization in Geneva, the United Nations World Tourism Organization in Madrid. Then we have the Universal Postal Union, based in Bern, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization in Vienna, and the World Meteorological Organization in Geneva. At the bottom of the slide, we have the World Trade Organization, which is not part of the specialized agencies, but among the related organizations that also belong to the United Nations system. Which brings me to this overview of the United Nations system. Well, don't worry. It's not about testing your eyes. I'm aware that you would probably need a magnifying glass to read all this. But that's not the point. It's just to give you an idea of how vast and complex the system is. It's huge, it's complicated, it's hard to know it all, but it probably also offers some interesting job opportunities. Perhaps you would like to consider this in the future.